You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and today we've got a really interesting topic. It's something that's coming up over and over again across the network, and it's really interesting from the standpoint of we talk a lot about digital marketing, we talk a lot about AI, but we don't always tackle the side of it, which is healthcare. And it's interesting because it affects all of us and our family, and yet there's been, across the industry a little bit. And when I'm talking to traditional brand side, this side of it that's not quite understood how complicated it's getting, how much it's needed. And so we've got some great friends, partners, supporters of the network over at Global Prairie. Tom Hileman's here. Tom, you and I have done, I don't know how many webinars together in the healthcare space because, after COVID hit and everything ramped up, it's just so important to everybody. But Tom, I'll kind of kick it over to you. If you want to do a brief intro on yourself and Global Prairie and all that fun stuff, that'd be awesome. And then we'll kind of jump in the conversation, which I want to do is I kind of want to focus it around AI as a whole. But anyways, I'll kick it over to you. Yeah, I'd love to have you jump in.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, we've been on quite a few webinars together, so it's always good to have a conversation. Tom Hileman, I'm managing partner of the digital practice of Global Prairie, formerly Hileman Group. We merged with Global Prairie earlier this year. Global Prairie is a top 1% B Corp and 100% ESOP. So the employees own and direct this. Our purpose of the organization is to do well and do good for our customers and the planet. And specifically, my focus is in healthcare, which hopefully aligns with the health and wellness of all of us there. So deep background in the technology, marketing, and of course, AI, I'm sure we'll talk about today. So thanks for having me on, Aaron. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be super fun because you have a unique, this is why I've always enjoyed our conversation, is this unique perspective of, hey, not only is it digital marketing, but you have these added complexities around regulations and HIPAA, which makes, it just requires a different level of focus and execution because of the repercussions on the other side. And so one of the things that, originally like, hey, maybe this helps out, in terms of like AI also could make it a lot more difficult. And so, I just kind of want to walk through, like, as people take a step back and they look at, digital marketing as a whole, and we can focus on healthcare, we focus on whatever you want. But like, what do you see happening with AI in this space, right? Like, how is it impacting marketers as a whole? And anyways, I'll kind of pause there and then we'll
there's a lot going on there. I mean, you think about, and you mentioned HIPAA, and recently Office of Civil Rights, OCR, and Health and Human Services, HHS, have issued guidance on the use of data and what constitutes patient and PHI, and that's become more and more restrictive. So I think one general statement, I think AI is going to impact literally everything that we do in the business world, and everything from a healthcare perspective, both from the clinical perspective of how care is delivered, and whether it's radiology and the reading of scans, because there's not enough radiologists around anymore to read all the scans that need to be read. So AI and tools are going to have to be there. To the way we market, I think in marketing, we'll probably talk a little bit about generative AI tools, which are kind of the rage, but I think even more interesting to me is the machine learning that you can do for both targeting, so the personas, the people that you want to target and reach at a high definition, and the ability to learn and optimize what we're doing on our communication. So I think literally every part of the care journey for a patient is going to be impacted by AI.
Well, I mean, do you think that we, like the general population, as we're all consumers of this, right? Do you think they realize what's taking place and the changes and the regulations and how like you're talking about the reading of charts? Does anybody like really realize this? Because I think there's just very few people do.
Yeah, I think it's pervasive. Like, so a stat I heard, and I don't have the attribution for it, but over 90 or 95% of all of the financial reports for public companies are written by machine now. So essentially the press releases and the quarterly earnings are almost all written by machine. And people don't know that because they're very kind of staid, right? So company XYZ reports a profit of X, a Y% increase over last year's and this quarter's returns, right? So most of those are almost all written. Most news and PR stuff is almost all written by AI today, and probably people don't even realize that, right? And I think what folks don't understand is that how much of that data is the lifeblood of how, like in healthcare, health systems have more data around about you than anybody else. Maybe the government would be the only one that perhaps has more information than a healthcare organization has for you. So I don't believe people realize how pervasive it already is in our lives, whether it's automotives that have AI built into them already, even though they may not be self-driving, right? So it's deeply embedded. And I think one of the fundamental understandings of a democracy where we live is to understand like how the world operates, right? And I think that'll be a great awakening for population at large, just in terms of how all this data is used, and then who has ownership of what data, and then what it means for me, right? It's really an interesting world, but most people I don't believe have a really good fundamental understanding of the level of technological and data integration in our lives.
And we've had some pretty in-depth talks, just even, on webinars or whatever. We've had, Microsoft on, a ton of different healthcare systems, Cleveland Clinic, but I'm always blown away by how much it is. But then, my question is then how are they using the data? Because there's a couple of things that I want. I want it to be target, again, like anything else, I want it to be targeted to me, but I don't want it to be creepy, right? And I want to know that you have the data and that it is a repository where it's held and it's safe, but I don't necessarily want that to be on my computer either. And then using that, so is there are there the AI tools that are collecting and organizing it, and then how are they harvesting that data to then do the marketing that they need to do, and yet protect it all, including HIPAA, and then you were saying like OCR, there's some other things that are out there too.
Yeah, there's a lot of government guidance around the newest change is, and I will get too technical here for the audience, but as OCR and HHS issued guidance, an IP address is, when combined with a personally identifiable PII, personally identifiable information, your name or email or whatever, that constitutes PHI now. So an IP address, so essentially where the IP address I'm connecting to you from for this webinar, combined if there was some knowledge of information around me from a health perspective, becomes PHI. So that's a pretty broad, and I would argue an overreach by the government. However, that's everyone else is debating it. We all have to comply with it, and specifically health systems, because they're nonprofits. So the compliance for them is even a larger stake. So there's a lot of that going on, Aaron. And so that's going to be the wave. Like the storage and management of data is going to be one of the paramount issues for the next 5 years. So in terms of today, how they're doing it, the good news is most health systems, they're not using it for any nefarious reasons. They're using it because they want to help provide your care journey, right? So if you're interested in heart disease and you're going on the web or a mobile app, they want to personalize your experience. So it's something for you, right? Or if you indicate interest in joint replacement, knee or hip, to be able to present you the information that you need to get you the care that you need. So none of it's really particularly nefarious. Although there's the television and movies may make it look that way, they're really trying to serve their customers and then measure how effective they are with that. So if I had a campaign and you came in, Aaron, can I tie it back to the services that you had? So how effective was my marketing campaign, which any other business in the world would do anyway, right? Like how much investment. But it becomes particularly difficult because it is patient. Folks don't necessarily want to share why they're going into a urologist or why they're going into a heart or into a cardiac ward, right? And I get that. So far they've done a pretty good job, but the systems are all pretty stovepiped between EMR systems and ERP systems and marketing systems. So they haven't really unified the data, and a lot of folks are pursuing a cloud-based approach for that, to kind of put the data into kind of a CDP, customer data platform, or a larger enterprise data warehouse, whatever you want to call it. But they're doing that, but they're not very far along just because so much of the data is what we call stovepiped in individual systems.
Yeah, but I mean, it literally mimics what's going on with direct-to-consumer companies today, even large organizations, traditionally retail, that are trying to get into the digital space. What am I doing with the data? How personalized? But, do I have a CDP? Am I going cloud-based? All of that stuff. But then you have all these added boxes that are around, hey, is it legal? Is it compliant or not? And, what's interesting is to see like how it's going to play out, because a lot of the, traditional marketing teams that aren't in, banking, which I put really close to healthcare, you just dump it into a clean room, it scrubs it, and then you go back out and you can retarget it. But that's not necessarily the case here because of the guidances that are coming out, right? That's
retargeting.
I mean, the fact that you can do this is amazing. That's all the restrictions that are out there. Like, it's amazing that it can work.
And you're right. Like, the clean room concept doesn't really exist, perhaps in the research side of healthcare. But in the consumer journey side, it doesn't really exist today. It's a very banking approach to it, right? And remarketing and retargeting are particularly difficult in the world of not allowing pixel trackers, which is really what the guidance is about. But pixel tracking is the fundamental tracking for much of the web, right? When you think about retargeting, remarketing, for instance. So some of those technologies are, as they become not allowed, and I think healthcare will lead here, and the other industries will follow. You have to figure out how you do it. How else would you do it? And it's with first-party data primarily. People building first-party data sets is where you're going to get the value out. And the good news for health systems is they have a lot of first-party data, so they can if they can manage that effectively. And I think one of the things that we counsel our clients in healthcare specifically is every brief or campaign brief or creative brief that we do now has a data privacy section in it. How are we going to make sure what data are we going to use? How we're going to make sure it's protected, right? And that way we can prove the compliance. It's already in our planning from the beginning, right? And this is what we're doing, and that's a big deal. Like, so that issue is not going away. And if you and I are talking in 5 years, I can't imagine we're in a world that's less sophisticated and less compliant when it comes to managing data. I just don't see it. I think the curve is bending that way, which is welcomed, but it brings challenges.
Yeah, I mean, so if we jump into like the AI side, how is that helping out? Because, I mean, AI has been the rage, right? It replaced the metaverse, right? Like, it's the rage. But I think it's because, the metaverse side was cool, and it was something to think about that was fun and cool and exciting, but not necessarily a necessity. But from the AI side, the ability of it to solve problems it's almost a necessity. And so
it is. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, so metaverse is still really cool, and I think it's still maybe 5 years too early. Although the pandemic kind of helped it, because we were kind of living in a metaverse enforced world for a bit when we didn't have freedom of travel, but it's still pretty early on there. But AI is across, it cuts broadly. And I think a lot of folks, now are probably viewing AI as primarily generative. So thinking Chat GPT or DALL-E or Valley or the different tools, right? Midjourney. But that's the only part of it. There's computer vision, which is revolutionizing kind of manufacturing and automotive, right? And then there's things like robotics, which will also deeply impact our lives, but they're lagging a little bit when it comes to some of this, because they're more mechanical, and that is always harder than software, because software we can iterate and rapidly or limited only by processing and storage requirements, right? Where in the real world, if you're making robots, it's a lot harder to do. Well, also physics get in the way sometimes. But really the AI machine learning, I think that the deep learning and the ability to make sense of the data and to really provide the big issues. We have so much data now. How do we make it meaningful? All this data and no information. So the idea is the data is just the facts, right? And information, the insights are kind of, what do we learn from them? What do we do with them? And I think that's where machine learning in particular has the ability to revolutionize what we do, because we can now see trends. We can now do targeting, so we can assess risks of healthcare populations for, say, breast cancer or different disease conditions, right? And those are good things in a world of limited access where people can't get the appointments as soon as they want them. We should prioritize for people who have higher acuity needs, right, or higher risk, because simply that's where the lives get saved. And I think that's where AI can come in, obviously with guardrails and testing and understanding of how these things work, and checking the biases of them, because all AI is biased. I think many people are concerned about that, but humans are biased, right? So how would we expect our machines not to be biased? They learn from us, right? They learn from the data that we provide to them, which is built by biased human beings. So we have to spend a lot of time trying to remove that, or make that as small as possible in the world. So there's a lot there, a lot of opportunity. I mean, I think that's if we have a lot of challenges as a society, and AI is a way to help solve some of that in a thoughtful, when applied thoughtfully.
Yeah, I think it's just a kind of a spin on, the technology that's being developed right now, right? You can say, hey, I want to service this ad, or I want to give access to a certain demographic that's more prone, right? You say, hey, you're more likely to develop this, and 3 people scheduled an appointment, and you're the highest risk, so we need to have you first. It's not that so much different than like all the targeting that's going in traditional paid media today, where I want to segregate, this portion of the country because allergies hit first, right? And so serve ads here with the biggest discount, and then later up here, it's the same.
It's similar, right? But I'll tell you where. So I think of a world of, I kind of tend to believe in Microsoft's Copilot as an analogy of AI. But it's like, as you mentioned, things are very similar. That's optimization and kind of time of year targeting and location targeting based on allergies, obviously in the certain areas where they have certain crops or certain types of fungus or whatever it might be, right? More prevalent there. But I think what's interesting is, like, so AI would likely optimize prostate cancer campaign to men, right? That, you think that'd be a fair outcome if the machines looks at prostate cancer? Likely men have prostate cancer, right? Not women. But in the real world, women make 70% of health decisions. So when you're doing marketing and advertising, we have literally almost 40% of our targeting is women who are caregivers for men, wives, daughters, granddaughters, folks who take care of those folks, right? So in an AI world, it would logically intuit that it should just be men who are marketed to for prostate cancer. But the reality of it, that's not how societally we do. So while a machine would do a great job of optimizing within the population for that, of men, clearly, because they have prostate cancer, the answer that's not exactly how human beings work, right? So that's where I think when we look at the technology, we have to keep our marketing hats on and our human hats if we're going to change human behavior, which is really all marketing is really changing human behavior, right? So if you look at the tenets of what we do as marketers, it's all about changing behaviors for our product or service versus your product or service, right? And so the AI machines can help us optimize within that, but they don't have a fundamental understanding of how humans operate. So that's where we have to be man and machine, or human and machine, I should say.
Oh, totally agree. The old the analogy around, everybody loves the self-driving car, until it hits the curve with the 35 mile per hour sign that some kids spray painted the 3 into an 8. And then it ends up accelerating as you go over the cliff.
Well, yeah, but the argument I'd have there, and I have a car that does self-driving, is it a better driver than I as a human am, right? So
yeah,
we tend to want flawless machines, but I would argue, I think the statistic is there's 2,000 accidents every day, or 2,000 individuals in the U.S. get hurt in car accidents. I'm not sure what the number of accidents to individuals is, but let's just say it's close. So is a machine better than that 2,000? And then how much better does it have to be, right? So that's the question. Now, it's a little different question if we're talking about heart surgery, although it probably shouldn't be. So the questions are when, and the number one cause of death, or number one or two, depending on who you ask, is humans making mistakes in medical care, right? Within that, so you look at those things, and humans are horrible at assessing risk, right?
Yeah, true.
That is one of our flaws of our early upbringing of caves and looking at, and we're negatively biased because that's what helped us survive. Because it's a lot less if you look outside and you don't see a mountain lion or something going to eat you, right? Being wrong on the not their side, and is their side, it's an asymmetric level of risk, right? So we tend to be biased for inaction or for protective conservative behaviors, right? So that doesn't always favor us, right? Where with machine drives 10 times better than we do, and we can take 2,000 people being hurt down to 200 a day. Well, that might be a good thing, right? But we expect perfection often out of our devices, right? And they're no more perfect than the people who built them.
Yeah, so true. Do you see on the interaction? I think of the human interaction side. AI is taking over a ton. Think about Amazon, their virtual assistant that basically jumps on and walks you through everything. It's all AI. And a lot of, there's, chat bots and everything else that's popping up on direct to consumer side. Do you see the same thing popping up, on the healthcare side as well to help walk people through a journey?
I do. We see that. I mean, chatbots they really grew during the pandemic, as with most industries, right? Because, and we have a labor shortage clearly in the clinical staff and the medical care, right? So how are we going to solve these issues without automation? And so a lot of that becomes, and once again, I think this is human and computer together, right? So let's think about a call center, right? If we can scrape off 10 or 20% of the people who called in and handle them with a chatbot, that frees up 10 or 20% more time. Our call centers then could be doing outreach to people who didn't go to their appointment or missed medications, right? Very proactive things that you could do in a healthcare environment if you could clear that up. So can we take people calling in to find out hours of the locations open, right? Or driving directions or parking, or these things that we can handle simply, or even simple health risk assessments for allergies or low acuity things, right? And then redirect them to agents or nurses or clinicians in general when needed. We could really save a lot of quality of time and let the human beings do what they're really good at, which are more complex tasks and serving more complex needs, right? So I think we'll continue to see that. There's risk in it. If you ever call the health system, it always says if you're having a medical emergency, call 911. That seems fairly unnecessary to me because why wouldn't I just call 911? But we also have litigation and compliance concerns too, with the tools that are offered. And unfortunately, we live in a pretty litigious society.
Yeah. It is interesting though. Again, I'm always blown away of how much it mimics the traditional paid media marketing, direct consumer. Just a lot of what I do is in that space as well. And when you're talking about, hey, staffing and staffing shortages, and I don't have enough people, these new tools are a necessity at this point in time. Maybe it goes back the other way. I don't think it does. I think, they hire people to do different things, but it was one of the webinars that we were doing, and I can't remember what health system was, but it was a big one, who was saying for that time, they were changing marketing to go actually after doctors for a while, or nurses, right? I think it was nursing staff, because they didn't need more patients. They needed more people to handle patients they had.
Yeah, we've done that for several large health systems that we've actually, and my agency had never actually done a lot of, historically 5 years ago, a lot of recruiting marketing for health systems. But that became a need because the patient, and it's the same set of skills, right? Who are we reaching, targeting, messaging, customizing the messaging, and then calls to action and influencing behaviors. But yeah, labor shortages across almost all industries aren't going anywhere. So I think our answer has how do we streamline processes? How do we automate? Which creates new problems and new sets of concerns. But we have to address the shortages of labor that we have to still meet the needs of the healthcare, the patients, or in society, consumers, right?
Yeah. Are there other like big trends that you see popping up? I'm just so interested in this space because I love digital marketing, but also this is something that affects me, my family, everybody around. And yet we never think about it, right? We think if we go to Amazon, we type in something, we order it, it ships, it shows up. And I don't always think about my healthcare system that way, but it could, right? Like, hey, this is what I want. This is the schedule. This time I want the appointment. And whether it's virtual or in person, it should just work and everything goes. It's the same mindset, but I don't always apply it here.
Well, it's a different market, right? So, I mean, Amazon has entered heavily, or is attempting to enter heavily into healthcare, right? But they're primarily low acuity, so they're thinking pharmacy services, or they're One Medical, which is some primary and urgent care, right? But specialty care typically isn't in the mix of more complex things. Now, there's no reason the health system shouldn't be able to deliver a more Amazon-like experience. You should never have to call to get an appointment. Like, that seems crazy to me. Having nurses who answer phones to help set appointments up, I don't know. That seems like we could do better things with that staff, right? We should be able to online schedule literally everything. Like, I mean, maybe there's some exceptions for very, very sophisticated, complex. Maybe you have a patient navigator there supporting that. But yeah, healthcare's been slow to the table, and they're going to get their lunch eaten in certain areas if they don't become more automated and more of a consumer experience, right? But there's also network issues in terms of your insurance. You can go certain places, like in Amazon or wherever, you can go wherever you want to get whatever you want, right? It's not necessarily true in healthcare. So it's very complex. And I think the American population doesn't really understand how to purchase healthcare. Or if you look at our statistics on health, we're not so good at that either, right? So I really think healthcare should be more about well care and changing the paradigm of how we interact as opposed to fixing the sick, perhaps helping keep people from being sick for as long as possible might be a better paradigm for that. But the payment models aren't there. So right now, I think it's an opportunity for health systems to really redefine what that experience they want to have, relationship with their quote patient is. And some progressive ones are being aggressive in the population health perspective and that. But I also think it's incumbent, like, we all should think about our healthcare a little bit more. And one of our favorite tabs ought to be our health system, right? If we want to maintain the health of our family and ourselves, like, we should take that as a serious concern. Unfortunately, I don't think we do.
Yeah, I think we're at a time now where we can have that access to the knowledge, right? You go back like 20 years, it's not all online, right? And so if you wanted it, you would have to call, you'd have to make an appointment, you'd have to go try to sift through, as opposed to now I go in for my annual well care and I get my blood drawn and everything shows up, right? On a Patriot, I just can go in, I can say, hey, how did it change year over year? What am I looking at? Doctor makes notes, recommendations. I mean, it speeds up the entire process. I don't have to have a follow-up call if nothing's wrong. So I think definitely that the way where you look at it now, obviously, is drastically different than it was 5 years ago. But I think the easier access to it could be like one of the tabs we always have open, right? Is our healthcare tab. Are there any reminders, right? Are there any things I need to worry about?
Yeah. No, it should be that easy, right? Like, and then one of my friends who's a physician, he always told me that medicine should, and I'll probably get this wrong, but the people who jump out of helicopters, pararescue, I think they are. One of their mottos is you need to be an active participant in your own recovery, right? In your own rescue, right? So you don't want to fight the paramedic coming out of the helicopter who's pararescuing, right? You want to help and be part of it, right? That's how we should be part of it, is our healthcare, right? We're not experts like the doctors and the nurses and the other clinicians are, but we should be able to assist by, hey, exercising regularly, right? Or eating more of the right things, or getting our annual blood tests and the different preventative screenings, right? But that's the mindset shift that has to happen. We have to be, we as citizens and patients need to be more active in our healthcare and take colonoscopies and breast exams and all those things that are important for us to be serious, right?
Yeah. Are there, yeah, and I kind of like steered the question away, but are there other things that are cool that are popping up, new things that we didn't get a chance to chat about today or do you have any questions for me? Like I always like to throw that out as well. I've been
Oh no,
for a while.
you're talking to everybody. It's really interesting to me. I mean, I envy you sometimes, Aaron, and to be able to have all these great conversations in different industries. I tend to spend most of my time in healthcare and a little bit in the B2B space. But I mean, I think we haven't talked about really the generative. I know I kind of deflected that a couple of times. I think that's really going to be game changing, specifically in a marketing context, because you'll be able to test and create content at scale, right? So I think that's you do better research. I use ChatGPT all the time for research in areas or specific things that I don't know, and just to give me an outline. And of course, I check it versus the attributions and the sources. So I think those are things. I actually think the biggest issue we face in marketing today is skill and knowledge. I think that we as humans aren't learning fast enough, and we have tools that can do these great things, but I think we're relatively ill-equipped at the moment because we haven't been doing enough time. We haven't spent enough time training, and then spending enough time thinking about how to use these tools. These are complex. Large language models are pretty fascinating, which is the underlying technology behind ChatGPT and some of the other generative tools. Like, I think people should spend a little time and understand how they work and what it means and what their limitations are.
Right. I mean, I totally agree with you on the I don't want to say the talent side, just the number of people that are out there. And I think the pandemic did a couple things. One, it demanded about eightfold the number of open positions in digital of what we had. But that doesn't mean that eightfold, the 7 out of 8 came up the speed of the 1. And since the pandemic happened and everybody's been running so fast and you're just trying to keep your head above water, you're right. They literally don't have time, to delve into all these new tools, all this new technology. And at the same time, VC money was just flowing in, and every other day new tech was popping up left and right. And I think we're finally at a spot now where the PE VC money is tightened up. If you weren't viable, if you couldn't make it by now, you're not getting another round, right? You better be close to Series A and close to profitability. And we'll see a weeding out of, everybody getting bombarded nonstop with all this new tech. And they'll start getting hit up by some really, really good tech with a lot of money behind it, a lot of brands signing on board, a lot of organizations testing it out where they can iterate, right, over and over again. And that's going to give people a little bit of a break and then an area of focus. So instead of having to evaluate 10 tools and pick one, you're going to evaluate 2 or 3 and pick one. And it's going to be, any of those will work. You're just picking the best one for you. But still, there is a talent gap. There just is.
Well, and there's going to be, right? Like, I mean, these new things, I agree. There's a lot of stuff that's out there today, and a lot of it will start getting cut off and things like that. But still, like these are, I mean, some of the stuff is generational technology, right? Like, I mean, you think about large language models, or you think about some of those pieces, like those things are sophisticated, like, and what they consider and the concepts that they build from, like that needs to be understood, right? And I think everyone's so busy doing their day job, they don't always have the time to learn, right? And I'm not being critical, folks.
No,
I mean,
I feel bad for them. I mean, marketing. I do more podcast on marketing and more conversations with people at Fortune 100 companies in marketing from the standpoint, it's almost a therapy session at times. Like, no, you feel like everybody else does, right? It's just you don't have the time. And digital marketing is probably the most impacted from the pandemic from a career standpoint. of how much you're demanded to learn. Your budgets went through the roof. You're expected to spend them. And now you're supposed to follow KPIs that are only 7 or 8 years old, right? And you don't even know if they're the best KPIs. It was ROAS for a while, and then it's something else. And then you also report into an executive team that doesn't really understand what you're doing. So you're trying to upward educate on something you're learning real time and expected to perform at a high level with tools you've never used before. You're just learning.
Yeah, and throw in compliance now.
That's right. Like, I love these conversations. You're at a next level, Tom. Like, on top of what everybody else is dealing with.
Well, right. Yeah. And the hard part now too is, so you have the compliance issues, but if we're being honest, most of the knowledge there that needs to be learned is by the executives. The folks in marketing already know it. They've been living it forever, but compliance officers, the legal folks, they need to get up to speed and understand what pixel tracking means, right? And how the web kind of really works. Marketers know that because we've lived in it, right? But the executives, whether they're COOs or CFOs or whoever, compliance officers, they need to have fun. They can't gloss over technology anymore, right? Yeah. You have to be able to dig in and dig through it. We spend a lot of time with the C-level folks just kind of training and educating them on what this means, right? So for instance, in all this stuff that talked about pixel trackers, everyone's talking about Meta and Google. Of course they are, because they're huge companies and we all know them, right? But pixel trackers are used for language translation. Whoops. They're used for geolocation for maps. Well, that's another issue. They're used for tickets for issues with the technology. And they're used for UX tools. They're used for a bunch of things that people don't think about. Everyone's focused on Meta and Google because that's what the government does. But so there's a lot going on here that people don't get to because, it's a lot, right? And so folks, in a world of heavy specialization, we also now need to generalize a lot more because there's so many things coming together. And that's tough. To be both specializing and generalizing in areas is a really hard ask.
Any last thoughts here as we kind of get to the end of this episode? This has been so much fun, and
no, it's great.
I don't know how you do what you do. I don't. It's awesome. I'm glad you love it and you're passionate about it. You make my life better.
No, it's
the healthcare
it's
side.
good.
Help as many healthcare systems out as you can.
No, I appreciate that. No, I love the conversation. I think so. While we talked about a lot of the negatives and the challenges, the thing that I think people need to think, and where the hope is at, right, is we've never been able to do more than we do today. So think about what we're doing right now. This would be magic 50 years ago. You and I talking on Zoom across time and space, real time, to a large audience who can consume it on the device of their choice at the time of their choice if they choose, right? So it's crazy.
And they can actually then do a transcript and have ChatGPT kick out a consolidation if they only want to spend 3 minutes reading.
All right, give me 100 words on it, right?
Yeah.
think about how far we've come, and that's why I'm tremendously optimistic over the next 5 to 10 years, because we have all these great tools. We've leveraged them at maybe 10%. I don't know what the right percentage is, but very low. You think about Excel or something, it does a bajillion things, and you and I probably use 10 of them, right? So maybe if we trained a little bit, we would use 50 of those things, right? And be a lot better at what we do, right? And I think that's the evolution that I see in front of us. That's the great challenge. And healthcare costs way too much. It's 20 to 24% of the GDP, depending on how you calculate it. That's a lot of money in a $17 trillion economy in just the US alone, right? So think about that for a moment. Let's say AI can help us become 10% more efficient. That seems pretty easy. And at 20% of GDP, it takes us down to 18%. That's a big deal, right? And so we can do a lot as a society if we modernize how we work as both marketers and just in general in the business world, or just as consumers and citizens, right? So, our future is extremely bright. Our ability is leveraged on our ability to gain this knowledge. So we can now learn literally anything we need to learn on the internet. Some of it's true, some of it not, right? So we still have to be smart enough to understand those differences. But It's an incredibly optimistic time. I mean, when is a better time to be alive than right now if you're a marketer? Like, I can't imagine.
Yeah, you've got all the tools. No, I love it. And I love your optimism. It's a great way to end a podcast. It could have gone two directions, right? The doom and gloom, or the robots are going to take over, or hey, this is really an amazing time, because it is.
And the people are worried about the robots. I have zero worry about the robots right now, because robots aren't very efficient. So
yeah,
once they start delivering us pizza and things like that, and they can be a little more mobile, then we'll have to think a little bit more, but not quite yet.
Not quite yet.
Roombas aren't taking over yet.
No. Awesome, my friend. Well, Tom, always a pleasure. And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Thanks, Aaron. Take care.
Thanks, Tom.